Starting right now?
Streaming.
No coffee?
Yeah, there is. It's on the counter.
Okay, here we go, gentlemen. We're starting a new mimer today. I have to tell you, there's a little bit of a hashkacha pratis behind the reason for this mimer. So I think for me, it's sort of part of the lesson. We'll see what that means. But as many of you know, I'm sort of in the middle of tackling the Rebbe's works from the beginning. And it happened to be up till 1964, Gimel Tammuz, which just happens to be where I'm holding after many years of toil. So all of a sudden I asked Ruvi to make a copy of a different mimer, and he just randomly out of nowhere says, "Hey, never done this. How many mimers have you made copies for us this year? 50?" So he says, "I have an idea. Try this mimer." And he sends me a picture of a mimer, which is the mimer that mimers the next page of what I'm about to read in this 10-year project. So I say, you know what? Let's do it. So I read it last night. It actually happens to be a Malukit mimer, which is, I usually like to only learn with you guys the mimarim that the Rebbe himself went back and edited. Just because the Rebbe said, I think, over 1,200 mimarim in his career. And only a handful of them were brought back and edited, and the Rebbe went over them, put footnotes, and basically put them out in their own special volumes called Sefer Maimar Malukat. So this is one of the edited ones, as it turns out, so it's additional hashkacha pratis. Okay, so we'll give it a go. That's the idea. Now this 1,200 Maimar, or more maybe, I think. 40 years of... let's face it, he was a prolific man. Yeah. And I think more. I mean, are you joking? The Rebbe's... No,
but he gave only a mimer on Shabbos, wasn't it?
Not necessarily, no. No. Yom Tov, weekdays, Gimel Tammuz. Anyway, a fantastic, impossible amount of body of work. Impossible to the point that it's actually not possible to create that much Chassidus from one man in 40 years. Somehow, it all came out. In any case, we're looking at the following week, Parshas Korach, Gimel Tammuz. Obviously, I know you guys are doing a long preparation for Gimel Tammuz with Rabbi Shammai in the evenings, but obviously there's something phenomenal and extraordinary that took place in the sense that every yortzeit of each one of the Rebbes, right? Obviously, you have the next Rebbe in line to come and give my Marim on that day and explain the essence of the day and why that day. For example, Tzfat is the obvious example. The previous Rebbe passed away on Tzfat, and every year the Rebbe would bring on Tzfat, say my Marim on Tzfat, and explain the nature of what Tzfat is to a whole new generation, the essence of the previous generation, the passing of the tzaddik. All of his life's work goes up, and his entire being essentially comes down and descends on that day. So it's like an unbelievable lesson to the day. When it comes to Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe's yortzeit, who's going to come and explain to us what Gimel Tammuz is? Right? So it happens to be that the Rebbe did. Right? Gimel Tammuz already had a previous state of celebration. Right? I know you guys are learning about this. What was Gimel Tammuz in the previous generation?
The Friedrich Rebbe got released from prison and got sent to the halfway house or whatever.
He got sent to Kostroma, to basically Siberia. But the halfway house.
Basically what it was.
But the idea is that, in short, and I'm just going to give you an introduction, why are we learning a mimer which was said on Gimel Tammuz by the Rebbe who passed away on Gimel Tammuz, and there's not just one, there's dozens. And the idea is that the Rebbe made a tremendous holiday out of Gimel Tammuz, basically because the Friedrich Rebbe had this experience where he was on the 15th of Sivan, right? Was taken into this horrible prison and given a death sentence. And it was supposed to be, in fact, when he was sort of brought to the parole board, he actually saw the document which was sitting on the desk, which said on there, the Lubavitch Rebbe execution, and it was crossed out. And then it said Lubavitch Rebbe 10 years in Siberia, and it was crossed out. And it said 3 years in Kostroma, and ultimately he was released for a 3 years in Kostroma halfway house. And this release date happened on Gimel Tammuz, right? So he wound up going to Kostroma on Gimel Tammuz, And he was basically the number one enemy of the state. The fact that he was not killed was of the greatest miracles that could possibly be, because they were trying to stamp out Yiddishkeit in Russia, and he was like the flame keeping it alive, and they caught him and they put him in the number one prison, and they intended to execute him. The reason they didn't is only because Hashem made a wondrous miracle that we're still talking about years and years later. But they figured they would send him away to Siberia and they'd sort of kill him over there where not everyone's looking. It became like a political storm for them. So what happened was he went onto this train to Siberia, to Kostroma. It's not really Siberia. And on the back of this train, on his way out, he gave a sicha. Okay, so he was standing on like I guess they used to have like sort of a little stage at the back of these trains in those days, and whoever Chassidim could muster themselves to go and find themselves to see the Rebbe off to his exile came around, and the Rebbe said, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, a sicha, like intense words against the government, how they're never going to stop us, and we're going to continue with our mission. He's literally just taken out of a death sentence. He's busy being put into exile, and he's still screaming at top of his lungs about how we're going to take down this whole regime and we're going to be free and they can't stop us. It was like a statement of unbelievable state of Mesiras Nefesh. And that sicha was preserved. And this mimer that we're about to read is based on this sicha that the Rebbe said at the back of this train on his way to Kostroma. The story, of course, is well known. When he got there, only 9 short days later, he was miraculously released on his birthday. And the next day he actually was just completely unshackled and left. So the whole thing was just this unbelievable miracle, the miracle of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, which we are now approaching the period which we're going to speak about a lot. But my point is that the Gimel Tammuz already was a holiday before our, Gimel Tammuz, when the Rebbe passed away. So there's mimers and sichas explaining really what Gimel Tammuz is. I will just say like a single word about it. It's not really the topic of this class for bringing, but I can't hold myself back from like the awesome synergy of the energy. What was the sort of the message of Gimel Tammuz in the Frierdiker Rebbe's time, which the Rebbe himself repeated and explained and repeated and explained. The Rebbe was talking about Gimel Tammuz for 40 years. You understand? So when Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe passed away, we had a wealth of information of what to understand about Gimel Tammuz. And he called this day, here's the short story how it goes. He said, when Gimel Tammuz happened, we weren't sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing when it came to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Why? Because even though, yes, he was getting out of this horrible prison, but he was being sent to exile. And in many ways, exile is sort of worse than prison. It brings rayas and proofs that in Talpi Torah, exile is a greater difficulty than prison itself. And not only that, but why were they bringing him to exile? Because, as I mentioned before, the prison was in sort of the spotlight of the international attention, and they figured if they get him in some hick town in somewhere in the foothills of Mother Russia, no one would be watching, and they could do. So they were very scared, the Chassidim, that this was only a ploy to take him to a worse fate. And so it says the Chassidim didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. When finally, 10 days later, he was released, they said, this was his chalta de geula. This was the beginning of the geula. And that's what the word Gimel Tammuz took on, this definition throughout 40 years, even previous, right? From that time, it took on the title, Gimel Tammuz. We didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing, but retroactively, it turned out it was the beginning of the geula. Right? So those words, obviously burning in our ears, when we apply this to our state of Gimel Tammuz, when the Rebbe has his histalkus and we don't know what's going on, the Rebbe announced that we're in Mashiach, all of a sudden he's gone, we don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, we don't know what's flying, the Rebbe told us, he's chalta to geula. This Gimel Tammuz is the beginning of the geula. Don't let your eyes fool you, don't think that this exile, the Rebbe Mamash also used to say, by the way, that when the Frierdiker Rebbe was exiled, this was compared to histalkus. In other words, he seems to have left your place. Going into the passing of a Rebbe is like an exile. You don't see him anymore, but he's still there. Nothing happened to him. In any case, this is a mimer from 1964, based on that sicha, that intense, wondrous sicha that took place on the back of this train that Frierdiker Rebbe said. Okay, shall we start? A little introduction there.
Rabbi, don't we say that prison is not in the Torah system because prison is very cruel, but exile is in the Torah? Because
There's certain levels of prison that does exist in the Torah. We had it just the other day. Temporary prison, right? You can put a person there until you find out what happens with him and so forth. But anyway, there's sichos the Rabbi gets into all the differences. There is such a thing, right? Yosef was put in a pit, and there is such a thing as prison. It's not one of the like you said, one of the punishments that's meted out as like a tikkun for a person's sin, but it is an inyan. The very fact that it's not a Torah punishment in a certain sense has a less strict stringency to it. Obviously, if you're going to put a person in prison like forever, yeah, each one has milas and chesronos, different aspects of strictness and leniencies. Okay, in any case, this pasuk is this mimer is based on this pasuk that, again, the Frierdiker Rebbe said at that time, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu kasher haya im avosenu al yazvenu v'al yitshenu. We obviously say this daily in our prayers, and it means, may it be Hashem's will, may Hashem be with us like He was with our fathers. He should not abandon us and essentially leave us. Okay, so this is the statement that Frierdiker Rebbe is quoting this pasuk. V'yedua hasicha shel bal ha'geula sha'amar b'gimel tammuz taf reish pei zayin. It's known, the sicha that the Frierdiker Rebbe said at that fateful moment on Gimel Tammuz in this year, 1927. And he says, Min beten by Hashem Yisbarach. What he says, there's a stickle Yiddish over here. He says, we request, we demand, and ask from Hashem Yisbarach. You know, he's explaining the pasuk where it says, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu kasher haya im avosenu. We're asking, let it be that Hashem should be with us, right? Like He was with our fathers, and He should not abandon us. He's just giving a translation of the verse. What are we saying in this verse? Let it be that Hashem should be with us, like a request, right? And the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on and explains. There's really two explanations. Hashem Yisbarach zal sein mit uns und wird sein mit uns, which is basically means He should be with us. And then it's another way of explaining it, which means He will be with us. Because when you say Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, it can be seen as a request, and it can also be seen as like a statement of fact. Hashem will be with us like He was with our fathers. So you could read it in Hebrew, basically the translation really just swings both ways. Let Hashem be with us like He was with our fathers, or Hashem will be with us like He was with our fathers.
Is that like Poteach et Yedecha? Is that a similar thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Poseach et Yedecha can really be read as a question. It's really more of a statement of fact. He opens His hands, right? Most people say like, but that's not really a request. It's a statement of fact. Hashem opens His hands. Yeah, by Chassidus it's a little bit of like a joke that they kind of, you know, it's like you're not. What do you put your hands up there for? That's not what it says.
No, but in my Siddur it says like there's a kavana. It says potech there, and then it says ask like for whatever you want. Like
you could ask for whatever you want at that time because you're declaring the fact that Hashem opens His hands, but you're not making a statement of a request, right? You're declaring Hashem opens His hands.
You're not opening your hands, and then He's
right. You're not, and it's not a question. Right, but it's a good time to ask. First of all, it's a sagul. You have to say this pasuk 3 times a day and so forth. But you're because what better time to ask when Hashem is opening His hands? But you're not. So anyway, it's a shaykh to for sure to ask, but it's not the translation. Tzrich lahavin. So we have to understand. Haray bakasha v'avtacha hem inyanim shonim v'luchora hem hefchi. So these two explanations of may Hashem be with us and Hashem will be with us, they're obviously different, and not only are they different, but they're total opposites. It's one or the other, right? You're either asking or you're declaring like a promise. Ba'afa bikain omer mir beten by Hashem Yisbarach, right? And nonetheless, even though they're opposites, on one hand, the Frierdiker Rebbe says we're asking from Hashem, zal zayin mit uns, He should be with us, and then we're simultaneously saying, un vet zayin mit uns, He will be with us. Shabakasha he, that the very request is lo rak zal zayin mit uns and lagam vet zayin. In other words, we're asking, but we're also at the same time asking in such a way where we're declaring that it's a promise Hashem will be with us. Yeah.
What does zayin mit uns mean?
basically Zal is should. Zain is more like he should be with us. Mit uns is with us. Vet Zain mit uns, he will be with us. Zain is like a little bit of like a stylistic. He. Vet Zain, he should be with us. V'hagam shetevas yehi. He lashon bakash v'gam lashon havtacha. So even though the word yehi on its own is both a question and a promise, it can mean he will be, like it's a certainty. Hashem will be with us, like it's a promise, or it's a question. Harehem l'chora perushim inyanim shonim. They seemingly are nonetheless very different. Whereas in the Sikha, kol el shnei inyanim yachad, it seems that the Frierdiker Rebbe is sort of making them as though they're one. Even though he's saying we're asking from Hashem. What are we asking from Hashem? He should be with us and he will be with us. You're asking him that he should be with you. The Frierdiker Rebbe just sort of puts it together and moves on as though that's like a normal thing to say. You can't really ask that there's going to be a promise at the same time, right? So this is sort of the direction of our investigations. Fine. Umam shech ba'asicha. He continues in the Sikha, the Frierdiker Rebbe, by saying, that when we're going to say Hashem should be with us, or will be with us, like he was with our fathers, repeating this concept that it's both a request and a promise, hu hagam, right? This is true even though we are in no way comparable to our forefathers. In other words, why should we ask that Hashem should be with us like he was with our fathers? The Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to say that this is a request which is kind of not based on any merits. Why should he be with us like he was with our fathers when we're in no way comparable to our fathers? This is the content of the Sikha itself. The Rebbe is sort of showing on our lowliness. Obviously, he's sort of requesting for himself, but on the behalf of the Jewish people, since he's the leader of the Jewish people, I'm being taken away. Hashem should be with us. He will be with us like he's with our fathers, even though, like, who are we in their shadow? So what is the source of this explanation? Right? V'kein Shlomo Omer. This is the midrash that we find in the Midrash Tehillim. And it says, Shlomo said, Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Melech shu socher polim. So Shlomo said a mashal of a king who hires workers. Right? So in other words, let me just explain. What's the midrash coming to explain to us? Why we should make such a request of Hashem. You should be with us like you're with our fathers, even though we're nothing like our fathers. And on this type of request, which seems like a foolish request, why are you comparing us to our fathers to get help when we're nothing like them? He brings this midrash. And it's a midrash that Shlomo Melech says about a king who hires workers. Then osin malachtan yafe v'nos lehem scharan. And they do a nice job. And he gives them their reward. Right? So the question is, Ma shevach yesh lamelech. Is there something to praise the king over this fact that he hired workers, they did a nice job, and he paid them? It's like, okay, every Tom, Dick, and Harry can say that. Is there such a praise to the king? Eimasai hu meshubach. When can you praise a king? Kishiyizkor poli mirai. When the king hires bad servants. He says in the footnote in different gears, says atzelim, there's lazy servants, lazy workers. She'einosin malachtan. They don't do their job. V'nosin lem scharan, and nevertheless the king gives them their reward even though they didn't deserve it. V'zohi tova gadola, and this is mamash a nice thing the king could do. Right? That's a praise for the king. V'kahai gavna, and then on this story the pasuk is brought. Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu kasher im avosenu. Right? This is really what the Frierdiker Rebbe is explaining, that even though we're lazy and bad workers, Hashem should be with us and will be with us like he was with our fathers, even though we don't deserve it. That's a praise for the king. So this is how he sort of explains why he could make such a request, even though humbly he's placing himself on such a lower level. Umavar ba'asicha, and he explains in the Sikha itself, this is all from the Frierdiker Rebbe, this that we can't compare ourselves to our forefathers. It's because our forefathers were on a different level. They were having literal mesiras nefesh for Torah mitzvahs and putting their lives on the line. That's what he says. Sort of end of quote from the Sikha of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe now asks on this, Tzrich lahavin. Hari amira sicha zo, haisa bekesher im nesiyaso legalus kastrama. When is he saying this sicha? When he's literally being dragged off in chains to a horrible exile, in a wilderness. Shagalus v'lifnei zeh, that the exile and before this the imprisonment in which he was beaten and paralyzed and tortured. Why was he there? Because he was having actual, literal Mesiras Nefesh for Torah mitzvahs for all of Am Yisrael, right? Yisera mizo, and what's more than that, the Amira of the Sicha, the very fact that he's saying these words in the full sight of armed guards who want to kill him for spreading Yiddishkeit, and he's standing there announcing he's going to continue to spread Yiddishkeit, and nothing's going to stop them, we're going to take them down, and we're going to go exactly as planned before. This is an act of Mesiras Nefesh as he's saying this. And what's he saying in the middle of the Sicha? We can't really ask Hashem that He should be with us like our forefathers, because they had Mesiras Nefesh and actuality for Torah mitzvahs. What do you think is happening over here? And he says we're like a lazy servant and a poor bad worker that the king has to pay us even though we don't deserve it. He's busy with the most intense Mesiras Nefesh we've probably seen since Avram Avinu was thrown into a furnace. And nonetheless, what's the content of the Sicha? And again, false humility is not really a Rebbesh thing. You know, if you want to say there's real humility involved, but it doesn't make sense. He can't just like start making things up because he wants to, look humble. He's having Mesiras Nefesh, right? So nonetheless, he says we can't compare ourselves to our forefathers because they had Mesiras Nefesh. So what's going on there? You following? Not following.
Solid. Yeah.
You're following.
Who said that first?
Shlomo in the Midrash, Shlomo Melech said this question. Yeah.
Could he be speaking to the Chassidim who maybe, I don't know, he's at this level of Mesiras Nefesh right now, but the Chassidim are like, tell me I'm watching him. I mean, I'm sure there's Mesiras Nefesh.
No, for sure, but he's talking about Hashem should be with him, right? In other words, he's basically asking for Hashem's salvation from this situation. And by the way, his salvation obviously was known to be the salvation of all the people. But yeah, your point is going to be addressed as well. Maybe he's talking about the rest of the people. But nonetheless, even on the Pshat level, he's obviously including himself as well, right? And he is literally having Mesiras Nefesh. Again, it's just false humility. And this point that you're making is the next paragraph. So, nice thinking. L'chora yesh lomar. Seemingly, you could say, this is what Nachum Meir wants to seemingly say.
Sorry, by the way, who wrote this?
This is the Rebbe's mimer.
So it was transcribed from him?
Yes, transcribed. Well, first of all the Maimorim were either, there was something called the Chosrim, which were like these sort of genius people with photographic memories that would sit there, a group of them, and listen to the Rebbe's sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hour Farbrengens and remember everything. And then right after Shabbos, they would gather, they would sort of trade notes and write it down and then present it to the Rebbe. As I mentioned in the beginning of the class, oftentimes the Rebbe would just make little corrections and just send it off, but sometimes, I'm not exactly what percentage, but a small percentage of the Maimorim that they brought back to him, he would then sort of work on. And sometimes change them and put footnotes and add things, and those were called the edited Maimorim. So this one, for example, was edited, which means that the whole transcription, whatever they gave, first of all, many of them were not said on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and they were recorded. Right, so they had actual recordings of them. There's, I think, over 10,000 hours of the Rebbe's giving Torah on record. I think he was, at that time in history, the most recorded man that had ever been, Mr. Movie Star. What's that?
It wasn't said in Hebrew, though.
It wasn't said in Hebrew. No, it was said in Yiddish, and they put it in Hebrew so it would be more shaykh to the public. Fine. So on your point, seemingly we could say, how do we answer this question? Kevan shebakashas bala geula. Since the request of the Bala Geula, the Frierdiker Rebbe, Yihi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, let Hashem be with us, or Hashem shall be with us, Haisa lo rak avar atzmo elogam avar kol Yisrael. This is exactly what you just said. Since he's really requesting not just for himself, but for all of Am Yisrael, kol elogam elu asher b'shem Yisrael rak yechuneh, including those which are merely called by the name Jew. And mind you, this is another important point of like a reference and a quote. When the Rebbe finally did get released, he put out this dramatic letter that said not only was he released, but all lovers of Torah and b'nei mitzvahs and even those who are simply called by the name Jew have been released on this day, right? Which is why we don't say Tachnun on this day. It's one of the few days Chabad doesn't say Tachnun, because it's Pashut, a Jewish holiday for all times. And the idea is that it's a Jewish holiday for every single Jew, because the Jewish people were miraculously released. In other words, it came through the salvation of our fearless leader. But the reality is it was an intervention into the natural order in a way that cannot be explained in any other way. And therefore the entire Jewish people were redeemed. And this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe says in these exact words. Even someone who's just merely called Jew. So he's saying, back to our point, since the Rebbe is asking that Hashem should be with us like he was with our fathers, not just for himself, but for every single person, maybe those who not only did not have Mesiras Nefesh, but could have been Mamash Rashoim. You know what I'm saying? All the Jews were saved. So maybe you could say what you said. Right? L'chein amar she'enum domi lavusein. That's why he said that we're not compared to our forefathers. Shayu bali Mesiras Nefesh b'pol, because our forefathers were meaning like the generations which came before us in general were generations of Mesiras Nefesh. Where these guys, you know, there was a certain amount of the Jews themselves that infiltrated and became like the biggest communists, and they were the ones that got the Rebbe, and they were the ones that told on the Rebbe, right? The Yavseskia, and they basically knew where all the inside mikvahs were in the class. They were the most evil ones. So maybe you could say that he was referring to them, because he can't say we're like our forefathers. Aval birze enu maspik. No, that's not going to be a good explanation, unfortunately. Ki alashin because if you look at the exact words, when he says we are not compared to our forefathers, right? He says we. He was putting himself in the mix, and it wasn't an accident. And you can't say that he just threw himself into that mixture of all of Am Yisrael who are not Bali Mesiras Nefesh because of simple humility. Why? This is kind of an interesting line to look at, but he says that the concept of being humble is only relevant on something which is what we call be'erech, which is like comparable, right? So I guess you can't say like, you know, these monkeys really just like, they're just grabbing bananas left and right, but I'm humble. Right? You can't really compare your humility to something which is not on the darga of being in your status, right? So you can't say, we're not Bali Mesiras Nefesh, sort of like falsely including himself as in an act of humility with the rest of Am Yisrael, because he's like on a completely different darga. You can't compare his humility to theirs. So he says the fact that he includes himself, it can't just be from a simple state of humility. That level of comparison doesn't even exist, and therefore he means business when he says we are not in a state of Mesiras Nefesh. Because he included himself, like our forefathers were. And then the question comes back, what are you talking about? You're literally like, could have been killed for the very words you're saying when you're saying these words that Hashem should be with us like he was with our forefathers. So we're back to square one on this. In other words, could be, but he includes himself. He's not talking to them. He clearly says to we. Okay, base. Remember, you thought we were going to do a different sikha. So did I. Okay. Hine nosef la diyukim sheba. In addition to these nuances in the sikha that we mentioned, tzrich bir ba lashin. We need to, in other words, besides looking at how the Frierdiker Rebbe approached this verse, let us have our own approach of linguistically breaking down this pasuk, which is a very interesting kind of nigla approach the Rebbe takes to trying to understand the meaning of this pasuk. In the words Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu, right? Shabakasav Atzmo, right? In the verse itself, setting aside right now the challenges of whether it's a request or a promise. L'chora, seemingly, ba'achrei she'omrim Hashem Elokeinu. In this verse we say, let it be that Hashem our God, right, is with us, Shuhu Eloka Shalan. We're already saying he's Elokeinu, which means let Hashem be our God, right? Yehi Hashem Elokeinu, may it be Hashem our God. We're already saying that he's our God, right? With us in a certain sense. Ubefrat lamavur b'Chassidus, particularly where it says in Chassidus, it's also generally in Kabbalah, and even in Nigla to a certain degree, but the Rebbe quotes Chassidus, Shelokeinu perush kochenu v'chayusenu. right? That the word Elokim, what does it actually mean? It's just, of course, it means God. But what does the actual word Elokeinu mean when we use that word for God as opposed to the word for Havaya or Kale or Shakai, any of these words? It means Kochenu v'chayosenu, right? Elokim means strength, right? That's like the little meaning of the word. So when we say Hashem Elokeinu, what we're saying is Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, should be our strength and our life force. So before we even get to the words Imanu, should be with us, we're already basically saying Yehi Hashem Elokeinu. May it be that Hashem should be our strength and our life force. Ma tzorech lebakasha shehi imanu. Good, like you're done there. Why do you have to say should be with us? You just said it should be ours, our strength and our chayas, right? What does the word imanu come to add? Gam tzrich lehavin omru imanu imavosenu. And then there's another question. Not only are we saying he should be with us, we then go and say, like he was with our forefathers, the lashon im nofel al davar shu tafel al davar shu imo. And here's going to be what's kind of going to spin our heads a little bit. Grammatically and linguistically, when you say this word im, it has a connotation that comes along with it, which maybe we didn't know. And he's going to prove to us from other areas of Torah, one in particular, to try and make a point that the word im always means that it's goes on something which is tuffle, secondary to the thing that is with it. When you're saying it's, and he gives an example which makes it very clear. It says, for example, that when you're dividing up like the spoils, let's say, of a woman who passes away, Yechalku yorshei abal im yorshei ha'av, right? That you have the idea of the inheritors of the husband together with the inheritors of the father. Which means there's two types of people that can be in line for inheritance: the inheritors of the husband together with the inheritors of the father. And Yorshei Abal hem tefelim li Yorshei Ha'av. How do we read this? It's like a halachic, diuk, that the inheritors of the husband are secondary to the inheritors of the father. And how do we know this? From the word im. Stay with me for a second, right? So it says Yorshei Abal im Yorshei Ha'av. When you say the inheritors of the husband with the inheritors of the father of the father are the main thing. And you're saying these should go along with the main thing. So whatever you say, basically the main thing is the one that comes after the word im, right? This secondary thing with this main thing. You getting that?
It's the same in English, right? Like you want
Yeah.
to catch up with your French fries?
Yeah. Right?
So like we were saying, the thing that comes after im kind of supersedes the first.
Right.
Is that how the halacha goes? Like in
That's how the halacha goes, yeah. First it goes to yeah. So the idea is that we're the inheritors, the children of the father. So in other words, the idea here is that when you're saying Afal Pikein, let's read the last line, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu imavosenu, this gets a little weird. What you're saying is that Hashem Elokeinu is tuffle to us and to our forefathers. You're basically saying let God, right, which is basically the ketchup in your analogy, be with us, the fries, right? With our forefathers, the fries. So God is all of a sudden the secondary thing. Like with us and with our forefathers, also bring along God. That's basically what the pasuk means. Just without getting into questions of the Frierdiker Rebbe, mixing in his interesting perush, the simple meaning is the request is that God should come along with us. And God should come along with our forefathers, because that's really the main thing. Right? It's very strange. We have to explain this according to what is known. That tam al yiras shamayim nemar lashon otzar. You guys have heard of this idea called the otzar shel yiras shamayim. When we talk about the fear of God, we call it the treasure house of the fear of God. It's just in general, you find this lashon throughout. Here he brings several sources where you see such a lashon. So why is the specifically fear of God, called a treasure house. Ki kamosha otzer melech, because just like the treasure house of the king, ein biyad melech lasos otzer im lo yikabitz macherim. How does the king make such a treasure house? He takes it from other people, right? How do you get so much treasure? Because I'm the king, and I took other people's lands, I took other people's money. It all comes to me. In other words, he didn't necessarily was not born with it. He's a conqueror. He's a king. So the whole idea of a treasure house is that it's filled with other people's stuff. So why are we saying that the fear of the Hashem's treasure house, the king now goes on God, and he has what's called an otsar sheyirat shamayim. We call it the treasure house of the fear of God. Why is Hashem's otsar called the fear of God called his treasure house? Ki ayira otsar shem melech malchei amlachim hakadosh baruch hu, the treasure house of the King of Kings, blessed be He. Eino biyad bidei shamayim. It's not something that He has, because it's not in the hands of heaven, as we say, akol bidei shamayim chutz mi yirat shamayim. So Hashem has everything except one thing, right? Because that's what sort of free choice is. He doesn't make you fear Him. That would sort of go against the whole concept of the creation of the world. He sets up a scenario and wants to test you. Are you going to accept me as your king? If he makes you accept him as your king, there's not really a proper acceptance. It's more like a dominance and a tyranny, right? Or at very best, you're like the angels that don't have free choice. So the whole idea is that Hashem specifically says, Yirat Shamayim is on you guys. And therefore, if Hashem has an otsar of Yirat Shamayim, it's because he filled it up with other people's Yirat Shamayim. With your Yirat Shamayim. So Hashem's holding on to this treasure house, which is your fear of him.
So where does it show that it's Otzer Yirat Shamayim? That's what's in the Otzer?
That's what's in the Otzer, yeah. If you look in Yeshayahu, Lamed Gimel Vav, what's that?
It doesn't say here, it's assumed.
It's assumed. We say it in davening. So this is why it's called an Otsar, because it's filled with other people's fear, right? Fear of God. So okay, why is the treasure house filled specifically with fear, right? It doesn't say Otzer Avas Hashem, right, or Avat Shamayim, or Avat Re'ehu, right? It's specifically a treasure house which is filled with fear. Hagam she'inyan zeh sh'HaKadosh Baruch Hu tzrich k'v'yochel la'adam. Even though one could argue, it's not just fear that we give Hashem. Hashem, so to speak, needs us for all the mitzvahs, right? The whole idea is that you have free choice. When you do a mitzvah, you get reward, right? Because you did something on your own. So one could argue that Hashem sort of is putting this power into our hands in many, many things, not just fear alone. But yet we don't call the treasure house of mitzvahs. And the reason is because really all the mitzvahs, we're not saying that they're not in our hands, but what are the mitzvahs to begin with? You have basically positive mitzvahs and negative mitzvahs. And what you have there, as the Alter Rebbe says, chapter 41 in Tanya, that the mitzvahs that you do positive are only really called mitzvahs if they're done with love. Mitzvahs that you do refraining from things, they're only really called mitzvahs if you do them from a state of fear. In other words, what's driving and empowering your mitzvah performance is your love and fear, whether it be an open, blaring love and fear, or even a latent love and fear. Like you're going to schlep out the trash for your wife, but you're not going to schlep out the trash for someone else's wife, right? It's because you love her or you fear her, right? And you're going to therefore get your body to do what it needs to do. So really, any mitzvah, if it's performed in truth, it's only performed because there's an energetic emotion behind it, which is either love or fear at some level. Otherwise, it's not. You can't really call it a mitzvah. Okay, so now we've sort of narrowed it down. Instead of saying Hashem is a treasure house of all mitzvahs, which could be said, really we're going to just break that down into either love or fear. Right? Because all mitzvahs are based on love or fear. But why are we pushing everything over to the fear department? That's where his treasure house comes from. We don't say he is a treasure house of love. So the difference between love and fear is the avas Hashem ba'agdei gile or milamayla. In general, there's several Maimorim. The Rebbe gets into this same conversation. But love of Hashem comes from a revelation from above. In other words, why do you love something? Because it's flashy and shiny and it excites you, and therefore you run after it. In other words, the the reason for the love is something outside of you. And it triggers you to go run over and find it. Right? It's a revelation from above, as we call it. Whereas Yiras Hashem ba be'ikr, now the Rebbe says in parentheses be'ikr, because you can certainly find a way to say that you're going to have fear based on something outside of you. He's not negating that concept, but he's saying that's not really what fear is. Right? Of course, something could scare you and you're going to have fear based on that thing outside of you. He's not negating that concept. But he says mainly the real definition of fear comes from you yourself. It's not something that's generated from outside of you. There's no cause, so to speak, which is forcing you to have fear, like there's a cause which is forcing you to have love. You can't help yourself to have love when you see the object of your love. But fear is something you have to accept. And that's why that's really what comes from you. That's something that says it's not bidei shamayim. Because that's of all the mitzvahs, the ones based on 613, there's one based on love, there's one based on fear. The real thing that you've got in your hands, which Hashem, so to speak, by the rules of logic, cannot put on you and cannot sort of summon from you on his end, is your acceptance of him, your fear. That's one thing you got to put on the table. And therefore, that's the one thing that he gathers from everything else and puts in his treasure house. Al derech yiras melech basar v'dam, and he says this is likened to a fear of king of flesh and blood. Again, we're not talking about a dictator, right? We're talking about like taking on like a rebbe, you know, like you're accepting a king upon yourself. The fact that the people of a kingdom are going to fear their king, it's because they voted him in, or they accepted him, right? And they put this fear upon themselves, right? And he brings, of course, usually this same footnote when we approach this subject. And he says, what's the proof that the fear the people have of their king is because they accepted it upon themselves? What's the proof? Because a melech acher shalom bin naso, because another king that's not from their country, right? There's like a visiting king comes in with his Lear jet. Ein a masa upachto alav. You're not going to have the same fear of him, right? And you find this even like sort of by Chassidim, you know, other people who are traveling to Uman and like they're falling on their faces in uplift fear. Another guy is a different Rabbi. He's like he doesn't have that relationship with Rabbi Nachman, right? He's like, yeah, good. I'll read his book. You're like, what? Are you crazy? Do you know what you're talking about? Because I haven't accepted this person as my king. I don't have that relationship with him. It's something which comes from within inside, right? And another person's king, I don't have. He's not scary to me just because he's a king. Let him be the king of Brazil. It doesn't bother me. You know what I'm saying? You can do what you want with your life. I don't have that experience from you because I haven't accepted this upon myself that you're the king, right? If I do, I will fear you.
So when Meshachis go out and hand people these cards and say, this is Melech HaMashiach, that's the wrong thing to do. Because you're forcing it on
Well, I mean, or you could say like bringing that up right now is the wrong thing to do. I'm not sure. But either way.
The question is relevant, isn't it?
I mean, tangentially. So I guess we could go there. But
Why do Chabadniks do it if they know the secret? Why do Meshachis do that? You know, I'm a Meshachis myself, but I wouldn't go out and force people to tell them this is Mashiach.
well, then you know what, sir? I want you to have this.
I love it. I believe it.
Okay, let's stay on the ball. Stay on the ball, gentlemen. We will discuss that at the right time, the right place. I hear you. I hear you. What's that? Next level stuff. Okay, so why are you not afraid of this person? Because you have not accepted him as your king, right? Not accepted him as your king. Whereas, what do we see when it comes to appointing a king in the actual Chumash? Right? There's a mitzvah to appoint a king. We have to put him upon ourselves. What's the pasuk? Som tasim alecha melech, and it's even said in the singular, which is interesting, right? It's like a mitzvah for Am Yisrael to appoint a king, and it says, "You shall place upon yourself a king," because you have to place him upon yourself. You could say that, you know, appoint a king for the people. It could be said in other ways. One of the mitzvahs is that, you know, the king shall take his throne and his crown, and he you know, but it says, no, you have to place the king upon you. Otherwise, really not your king. It's all about this acceptance from within. The king cannot just be placed upon you. You have to place him upon yourself. That's the point. V'al pi zeh yesh levar halashon yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu kasher haya im avoseinu. Now we're going to go back. The Rebbe means business. He's not going to change the grammar of this sentence. He's going to just try to explain it. Hashem is, so to speak, the ketchup with us, with the fries, right? With our forefathers. Yeah, and Hashem, we'll spice it up a little bit. How can you say such a thing about Hashem? Because now it makes sense to some degree. Yiras Hashem. Like we're supposed to say every morning before we daven from Perek 41 in Tanya. It says this is the beginning of all avoda and its essence and its root to fear God, right? If someone tries to go serving Hashem with just love, we're going to basically laugh at them. It's not called service to Hashem. Why? Because it's coming from love. You haven't accepted it upon yourself in truth. You're just doing it because it's shiny and bright. You like this mitzvah. But if another one comes along you don't like, you won't do it because you don't love it. If fear is not the driving root of all of your avodah, it's the ikar of ashur of all avodas Hashem. You don't have it, you don't have anything. So since fear of God is this ikar who avodas Adam, and basically it is mainly the main avodas of man, and therefore, this idea of Yehi Hashem Elokeinu, which is this revelation of godliness, it's really secondary to Imanu and to Imavoseinu. It's secondary to us because the root of Avoda is not that Hashem is going to be with us and reveal Himself to us. Very nice. That will come and go. The only thing that's going to keep this world alive and basically the ikar of all of Avodas Hashem is Imanu. I'm going to do it with us. And because it's sometimes difficult for me to do that, so He's going to write Lekutei Sichos, right? And He's going to make miracles for the whole world and show everybody that He's the Rebbe, so that there's a little bit of Hashem Elokeinu involved. There's a revelation from the King to show you that He's worthy of your acceptance. But that's not enough. That's secondary to I accept Him. Imanu, right? And a little help from above doesn't hurt to basically inspire me to take upon myself that decision. So it's secondary to the ikar, which is that I'm making this call, I'm accepting the King upon myself. Yeah. You following this? You getting what I'm putting down here? Pick it up what I'm putting down? All right, we're done for the day.